Welcome, everyone. I'm talking to you from San Diego, California. As David said, I'm president of the VTC32 Under the Computer Hood user group. And this afternoon, most of you are in afternoon time zone now, we're going to be talking about sunsets. And specifically, Windows 7 security sunset, where Windows 7 is going to be losing its security updates at the beginning of 2019 or 2020, and what you should be doing about it now. So for operating systems, right now Windows has kind of a neck-and-neck competition with Android for world OS market. This statistic was from middle of last year, that Android had 40% and Windows had 36.5%. But I looked at it this morning, and now Windows has edged up above Android again. But the remarkable thing to me in this is that Windows is still competing very heavily with Android when you consider that almost everyone in the world has a smartphone, and a lot of them are Android. That Windows, since they don't have any exposure anymore in the smartphone field, that's all PCs that is providing that that large market share in worldwide OS. Now, for the PC market, Microsoft Windows has the bulk of the market at over 80%. In fact, right now it's not. It's actually dropped down a little bit. I looked this morning and it was 79%. Not that it's like the stock market or something. Apple's OS X has gone up a little bit from what was middle of last year to 15. The unknown, as this research firm classified everything else that it didn't know about, was at 3%. Linux has remained constant at 1.6. But Chrome OS has gone up from 0.86 to 1.4%. So these things change over time, but Microsoft still holds the majority of PC market by a wide margin. Now, in the Windows market, of all of the Windows operating systems, the supported versions presently, Windows 10, once again, this is as of last year. They had just broken the barrier to having more market share than Windows 7. When Windows 7 came out, it was another dominant operating system like Windows XP had been for Microsoft, and it quickly gained a large following. And Windows 8, when it came out, and even 8.1, never challenged it. When Windows 10 came out, Microsoft was kind of dismayed that they couldn't get a bigger dent in the market against their own product, Windows 7. It was only sometime in the middle of last year that they finally exceeded Windows 7 in market share. Now, at this point, since the security issues that are going to be involved in Windows 7's leaving the market, becoming a non-supported operating system here in 8 more months, Windows 10 has gained even more market share, and they're now at 56%, and Windows 7 has dropped to 33%. So there's still a number of people probably that have finally done something about what they need to do this year for making sure they can safely compute while previously using Windows 7. But there's still some out there trying to figure it out, I'm sure, as most of you listening are, and are interested in what they should do. And I'm going to be telling you that here in this program, at least giving you some advice on it. So Windows, when they create a product, each of their operating systems has a life cycle, and they've published on their website Windows Life Cycle Fact Sheet that details their operating system's life cycles. Each life cycle begins when a product is released, ends when it's no longer supported by Microsoft. It's done. Obviously, people can use it, but Microsoft's involvement ends. They're not going to support it anymore. Now, their support takes a couple of forms. They have what's called mainstream support, which includes both security and non-security support. They're always going to be, whenever they're supporting it at all, doing security updates, but their mainstream support includes changes to function. This is a new operating system, and they might find that a particular way that they were doing things was not working well, or people didn't like it. And so in the next service pack, they might change features and functions to update that. And in this mainstream support, it can have complementary support for issues that you'd have for most all customers. And of course, Microsoft will always entertain paid support for things that they want to have questions answered, things, especially from commercial companies. So after the mainstream support ends, then they go into a period of extended support, and the dates are all specified for each product in this life cycle fact sheet. The extended support means that now they're no longer making changes to functions and features. It's they've gone through a service pack or two, and they've stabilized things, and now they're only going to be updating security. They've probably now focused their efforts on their next operating system. So they're going to be supporting patches for security issues that are found, but only until the end of this extended support. Now, there's probably paid options that are typically always available to commercial, industrial customers, but the average user, all they get is security updates until the end of extended support. Following that, it's end of support. It's end of life, effectively. Now, for the existing supported products, this is what Windows has. Windows 10 is a little different than the previous versions in that it's supported based on version, and they're not claiming that there's ever going to be another version of Windows. There's not going to be a Windows 11 or 15 or 23 or something. It's going to be continually updated in service packs and new versions, still be called Windows 10, but and the updates will be, at least at this point, automatic, but they will require potentially particular hardware compatibilities to remain applicable, so that you could buy Windows 10 on a computer, but as time goes on, you would be able to, if you took the automatic version updates, you would remain supported for certainly for security, but any other features, because new features will come out in these larger updates. But there may come a time when your hardware is no longer compatible with what they've decided to do with the new version of Windows 10, and then you're out of luck. Windows 8 was the last version that didn't follow this, and their software for 8.1 was released in 2012. Its mainstream support ended in 2018. And if you're one of those few 8% or so of the market for PCs that is using Windows 8.1, you've got extended support or security support until 2023. Now, Windows 7, which is still very popular, I run most of my home computers on Windows 10 with Service Pack 1. That was released in 2009. The mainstream support ended in 2015, and the extended support will end on January 14th, 2020. So that will be the end of Microsoft's support. Now, at that point, Windows 7 will become like the other expired operating systems, such as Windows Vista, which had its support end in 2017, and Windows XP, a very popular operating system that had its support end in 2014. Now, maybe some of you are still using Windows XP somewhere. I know of a few businesses that still do and rely on it. But, and I actually have a Windows XP computer or two at home. I actually wrote this presentation, created this presentation on Windows XP because I happen to like that older version of Microsoft PowerPoint better than the new ones with all the ribbons and everything. I just run it offline. So even though an operating system is expired, you still can utilize the computer, and we'll talk about why you might want to, but you have to be cognizant of the security issues that are involved in that. So for Windows 7 users today, 2019 is the year of living dangerously. What that means is that you need to be on your guard because your supported operating system is going away. It's reaching the end of the line, and there will be no security updates after January 14th, 2020. So if you're using Windows 7 after that, being connected to the internet and doing things carries a security risk. Maybe you're not doing that much, in terms of important or what you perceive as risky, risking much of your information or anything. Maybe you're just doing email, or maybe you're not doing your taxes, you're not going on bank accounts with it, maybe you're just writing documents even. But it's going to be possible, even if you don't have information on that computer at risk, somehow they could get through some vulnerability. Hackers could get software on your computer that, if there's nothing on your computer that they can exploit, they can at least use it to be part of their botnet to attack other users or do things like that. And you don't want to be part of that if you can. So there is a risk in using it if it's connected to the network. Now, I once thought that maybe Microsoft will, because there are a lot of users of Windows 7, they might at the end extend the support or something like that. But it's obvious now at this point, 8 months out, that that's completely unlikely. There's no way they're going to do that. They're pushing forward with this, and we're just going to have to find a way to deal with it if you're a Windows 7 user. So every user that's out there on Windows 7 needs to consider their particular situation and start down some path to continue their safe computing. Like I said, I've got a number of Windows 7 PCs that I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do with. I've got my own desktop and laptop. My wife has a desktop and a laptop, and we're going to have to do something to make ourselves safe as of January. So there are a number of alternatives. I've come up with a list here. There's probably more. Go into a cave and give up computers altogether isn't on my list, but that's not probably an option for me. But these were all ones that I would consider, perhaps, and so all of you should too. First option, continue using Windows 7 just as it is. And there's obviously benefits in that you don't have to learn anything new or do anything different, but there's a big security risk come January of next year. You could also, number two, update Windows 7 PCs that you have, some or all, to Windows 10. And that maybe is a lower cost option. Obviously, it costs more than doing nothing like number one, but it's a situation that you have to weigh with the hardware you've got. You get to save the computer hardware that you've got and not have to incur expense of buying anything new. You will have to get Windows 10 to install, and you'll be able to maybe use programs that you've got, but there's other downsides to it as well that we'll talk about. Third option, you could buy new Windows 10 computers to replace all of the, or some of the, computers that you have now that are running Windows 7. And That's obviously going to have a lot more expense than either of the first two options. So you have to go out and buy new computers. But you will have a computer that is certainly running Windows 10 well, as opposed to maybe in the second option if you're trying to update and it didn't work so well. You'll probably have to buy some new software perhaps, as you couldn't transfer things that you were running that were compatible with Windows 10 on the new machine, or you might have to buy something because what you had before was not compatible. Fourth option, as long as we're thinking about what to do and changes to make, might be abandon Windows altogether and try a different OS on a desktop, laptop, non-mobile PC. And that's the way I define it here as, non-mobile, similar type of hardware that you're running your Windows 7 on. And you could consider switching to Linux. That would be a low-cost option, because in a lot of cases it can be run on your older hardware. It's not as strenuous in requirements for what it runs on, and so that could be a low-cost option. Or you could change to the Apple ecosystem and buy a Mac. You would have to buy new hardware, because if you're running Windows 7, you're probably not running it on Apple hardware. So you will probably have to go buy Apple products to do that. So there's going to be more cost involved in that. Probably more cost than it would be to buy Windows 10 computers. I'll add another option on here. We talk about it a little later, dealing with the Chrome OS, adding it to as it's differentiated from Chromebooks, which I'm going to talk about in our fifth last option for user alternatives, which is not only abandon Windows, but abandon PCs entirely and use only mobile devices. There are a lot of people that don't have PCs but do a lot of computing on their phones or on tablets or on Chromebooks. And if your needs are not unfulfilled by those devices, perhaps that makes a better way to go, and just abandon your Windows 7 PC and PCs altogether and do things on these mobile devices. But there are a lot of advantages and drawbacks to that approach, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And the obvious thing is, when you're doing this, any of these choices, when do you make the change? Because if you wait till the very last minute and you have to make sure you can pay your bills online or do some other specific things, generate your credit or your Christmas card letter or things like that at the end of the year, and you wait too long you make your change right at that time at the end of the year, wait too long to switch things over. You obviously want to try and switch it over if you can before the deadline. But if you cut it in the week that it's supposed to end security support and you have some problems, then you may be unhappy. So maybe you should consider doing something earlier so that you have time to have things in parallel, get a new computer or set up a new computer to operate ahead of the deadline. But that's all things that you're going to have to consider. So the one option, number one, continue using Windows 7. Now, it's the easiest thing to do because you're familiar with it, and it may be safe for a short time after Microsoft stops supporting Windows 7. But eventually there'll be some kind of problem found, some backdoor, some security flaw that someone out on the web will find. One of these hackers will figure something out that they can exploit, because that's the way they make money, is trying to exploit things to take over your computer, get your personal information, and once they figure out something, it will be published on the web so that all of the people out there doing that kind of thing will have that information. And Microsoft at that point will not be making any security updates to fix that. And so at that point, if you're online and doing things that are important, for your security, things that would put your information at risk, your financial information, your personal ID, then going online will be risky. And even if you're not, it's possible that your computer could be taken over. It could be used for transmitting child pornography or something as a repository for that, and you could get into big trouble. So being online, once you have no security assurance, could be a risky thing. But if you're not connected to the internet, then you could safely use that computer for other things. Hackers can't get to you. If they even got something on your computer, it couldn't get off into the web again. So the advantage obviously of using Windows 7 is no need to learn a new OS, but you might have to only run it in an offline network, and that may be too limiting. But even if that is too limiting, you might consider having one of your Windows 7 machines kept off network for a number of reasons. Like I said, I've got a Windows XP machine that I kept on when it became obsolete in terms of security support, and I went to Windows 7 because there were things that I needed to do and programs I wanted to keep running that weren't going to work well or be compatible, or that I could transfer onto my computer. And with this transition from Windows 7, it's going to be the same thing. So you may have software that won't run under Windows 10. You might have to buy software to replace it, and you may not want to pay for that. And typically those kinds of software might involve mapping software, doing some photo editing. A lot of times they're involved in hardware that is not maybe supported anymore. If you have a scanner, or I have a handheld GPS that maybe the company's gone out of business, but you still have this device, and they only wrote drivers to use it for Windows 7. You can't interface it to a Windows 10 machine anymore, and there may be games that are not going to run on Windows 10 as well. And there also might be interfaces that you have on your Windows 7 computers that are not available if you need a serial port. Now, there are adapters you can buy to convert USB to most everything, but perhaps the software that you've got on your Windows 7 computer needs it to be an integral part of the computer, and that won't work as well. So the second update, updating Windows 7 PCs to Windows 10 is likely to be a cost to upgrade to Windows 10. You'll probably be able to keep more programs running because you're updating them to Windows 10. And it's likely to still have some programs not be compatible with Windows 10, however. The hardware you've got now, though, running Windows 10 is likely to be older. It may have been purchased when Windows 7 first came out. It could be 10 years old. And so it may be a little older. Now, maybe when they had Windows 10 offered for free here about 2 or 3 years ago, you may have tried their Windows compatibility tool to see if Windows 10 would run on your computer, and it did. But they've gone through a few service packs and versions since then, and now you may find that Windows 10 has progressed that your present Windows 7 computer isn't compatible anymore. And even if it is, it's possible that the next service pack may have some changes that make your new your old hardware not compatible now. So if you've got older hardware, there is always that risk. The next version of Windows 10, even though you're allowed to keep updating, it may not take it. So you might wind up, if you want to update through an upgrade, that you spend the money on the OS version to update and buy some replacement programs, but then find it has a limited life in a year or so, perhaps you can't do that anymore. And the new version of Windows 10 that gets automatically put on your computer doesn't work. And of course, with the update alternative, you will have to learn Windows 10. It's not perhaps that big a deal, but it is a little different. Now, the cost for Windows 10, I looked the other day, and the cheapest way to get it is a download from Microsoft, and there's two versions. Windows 10 Home was $110 on Amazon. Windows 10 Pro is $185.99. So there will be a little bit of cost to that, but you do get to save the hardware that you already have. The third option is to buy a new Windows 10 PC to replace those computers that you've got running Windows 7 now. Maybe laptop or desktop or both. But this would be the most expensive of these previous two options. Obviously, you'd have to go shopping for a new PC. Some would really like that. Some would think, oh, I have to spend money. This does assure you that the machine you have will be compatible with Windows 10 because you're buying it, as opposed to upgrading a machine you've already got. So it's easy. No OS installation issues. It's ready to go. It may have some software on it that the PC manufacturer put on that you've got to find a way to take off because you don't care for it. But in terms of the OS, it should be set up fine. Now, you may still need to buy replacement programs depending on what you want to do. Some of the software that you've got on your Windows 7 machine, you may not have the original disks or the right to install it on another machine. Some of it may not be a version that's compatible with Windows 10, and you may have to go out and find the version that is compatible with Windows 10 and purchase it. So there are that disadvantage in terms of additional cost, but it can provide you with some big benefits in terms of having current hardware. Your old computer may not have USB 3 or gigabit Ethernet or the current Wi-Fi capability that is out. You can get all these. You can get perhaps an SSD drive in your computer. So you would have more capabilities, more functionality with this option as well. And it will provide the longest PC life going forward. You expect most times a new computer will last you 5 years. Often it's the operating system that makes it obsolete. I've had so few PCs fail for me, as in terms of a hardware failure. Most always they become old and feeble, which I guess is a better way to go for everyone than just keel over. But if you're updating your existing PC, you might only have a few years of life left out of it. Buying a new one will guarantee you many more years going forward. But as in the other case of switching to Windows 10, you must learn Windows 10. Now, Microsoft recently sent me something, and many of you Windows 7 users out there maybe saw this as well. I saw this system screen pop up when I went into Windows 7 here on April 18th, and it's Microsoft's way of pushing us towards Windows 10. They said after 10 years, support for Windows 7 is nearing the end, and gave you a button to press there, click on to get more information. That leads to a website that Microsoft had put together to provide you with a lot of this information about what's happening with Windows 7 and their end of security support and what they think you should do, their advice. So what does Microsoft recommend to all these Windows 7 users, the 33% of the market that still uses it, to do? Well, Microsoft recommends buying a new computer with Windows 10 to replace your Windows 7 computers. And it's obvious. They think that's the best option because it will guarantee that you'll be getting a machine that has a good installation of Windows 10, as it's done by the hardware vendors, and it has no compatibility issues, and it also helps them support their computer vendor friends that would like to sell you new hardware this year. They say that they don't recommend upgrading, even though they sell Windows 7 software for upgrade. If your computer is older than 3 years old, you should really consider replacing that PC, because they say that the Windows 7 PC you could be using could be 10-year-old technology, and the new computers you'll be getting will be much faster, which they will be, and more capable, more compatible with new things. Be able to utilize all the Wi-Fi standards that are available, faster interfaces, and things like that. So I've put the URL up here for that same message that they gave me, and this is what that this is what the website looks like, and they talk about what does the support mean, what can you do to prepare, and it has a lot of useful information that you should look at in the course of trying to figure out what you're going to do with your Windows 7 computers. And of course, helping you, they have selector guides to help you find the right PC for you with, of course, Windows 10. Now, they have an FAQ that outlines this and talks about what the problem is and when Windows 7 will be discontinued. How do you get Windows 10? But you can buy it as an update, but they think you should buy a new computer. Can you update Windows 7 to Windows 10 for free? And they acknowledge there was a promotion to do it and ended 2016, and they're not going to repeat that. So, all of us that held out for that hope, and lists what you should consider in a new computer. So, while you're making a big change like this, you should consider all changes. You're going to be buying new hardware, you're going to be dealing with a new operating system. Perhaps you should consider an even bigger change, if that's something you've ever considered, or if you haven't, it's useful to think about. Perhaps you should switch to a Mac or switch to Linux. Now, Apple products typically are more costly. They hold a lower market share, but they may have advantages for you, especially if you're already partially into the Apple ecosystem with maybe an iPhone or iPad, but it's probably going to cost you more. And if you are not familiar with the Mac, it's going to be a little different for you. You could also consider a switch to Linux. Now, it's going to be, as opposed to the Apple, much lower cost. Even lower cost than switching and buying Windows 7 or Windows 10 PC instead of Windows 7, because you can typically use your old hardware. Linux is a lower, needs lower resources, but it is even less of a market contender, and so you will have to deal with that. Another option that I've listed here is to perhaps not as a replacement for Windows 7, but as an alternative, a way to use your old Windows 7 hardware if you decide you're not going to update it specifically, would be to switch or update your old PC to a Chrome OS. And that has some advantages and disadvantages I'll talk about in a minute. Now, obviously, any of these new OSs, the Apple, Linux, or Chrome, will have another learning curve associated with it. So you've got to deal with that. Now, even if you did that, you've got to realize that Windows is still more universal. It's a larger market share than any of these, more compatible with the rest of commerce. There's more programs and apps available. Most of the hardware that is out there is going to be compatible with Windows-type computers as opposed to Macs or Chrome, perhaps even Linux. So how about a Mac? Well, in my mind, they use a little different approach to things than the Windows user that I've, kind of grown up as. I did use some Apple PCs in business many years ago, and I can adapt to it, but I found they think in a different approach. I do own an iPad, but full disclosure, I won it in a contest. And I've always had more difficulty with it, trying to figure out how to use it, how to find things on it, because they just approach things, in my mind at least, in a different way. I found it much easier with my more extensive background in using Windows and Intel-based PCs to use the Android tablet that I bought than my iPad. So you may or may not have that issue. But if you're used to using iPhones, perhaps, it wouldn't be an issue. Apple's a closed ecosystem. They don't let their things play with other companies' things as much. And so you may need to buy new accessories if you choose a Mac, new printers, mouse, other input devices. And certainly the software will all be different. So if you were doing specific things on your Windows 7 PC and now want to do those on your new Mac, you'll be buying new software and have new added costs and learning curve for that. And Apple computers are typically more costly than typical Windows PCs. How about Linux? There are many good Linux distributions. A lot of users in my user group like Mint, but there's a bunch. Most will run easily on your old Windows 7 PC. They don't need much in terms of resources, so most likely your Windows 7 PC could run it. And most of these distros are free. So you can even put them on a USB flash drive to try and run off of the flash drive. And if you like it, then you can do a disk install. They can even be made to look like Windows 7. The Mint's default Simon interface looks and works a lot like Windows 7's Aero graphics interface. And so that might even be easier for Windows 7 user to adapt to than switching to Windows 10. It comes with many of the essential desktop programs you probably are using. LibreOffice for office work, Thunderbird for email. I'm using that even with my Windows 7. Firefox for web browsing, you may be using that now. For other functions that you want to do, there are usually a lot of free open source programs that are available to use with Linux. GIMP for photo editing instead of Photoshop, Evolution instead of Outlook, and the LibreOffice instead of Office. You can run almost any non-Microsoft browser, Chrome or Opera with Linux. And if you really absolutely need to be compatible, you're exchanging documents all the time with people using Microsoft Office, and it must be exactly conforming to Microsoft Office, you can run Microsoft Open Office, which is an online, over-the-web Office suite offered by Microsoft, even on your Linux machine. And if you need help, there are probably, maybe you don't know them, but there may be a few out there, Linux users in your group or in a nearby user group that would be happy to provide advice and assistance. In our user group, we have definitely a contingent of Linux users, and they're always willing to help, as all user group members are, other members to help solve their problems and know more about their particular interests. So how about Chrome OS as an update? Another way to reuse your hardware that you can't run Windows 10 on might be to install an open source Chrome OS version. It's not the same exactly as a Chromebook. Chromebook, Google has made the Chrome OS specifically for that hardware. It's a very, mobile platform, but you can get a lot of the same features that you would have in a Chromebook in a bigger hardware by putting Chrome OS on your old hardware. And that's a way to utilize that hardware. So you can do a lot of the things that a Chromebook can. It's not going to be as easy on battery life or as small, but it would still have a lot of those capabilities. And there is an article that I've listed here that from How to Geek that talks about that. And I would consider looking at that and I'm probably going to do that to convert at least some of my old PCs to Chrome to try that out. So the final version, or final alternative, is abandon ship. Abandon PCs and go mobile only. Now, there's a lot of people that are doing this. Maybe they've never used PCs at all. Young people that grew up with smartphones, tablets, and Chromebooks, and only do that. Anyone can do that, but it just depends on what your needs are. It's a lot simpler to do a lot of stuff online. There's more things that are done online, and they're handheld, easy to use. You have the convenience of mobility, but you're limited in screen size and have compatible accessory and interface issues, perhaps. I don't know, as I've grown older, I've wanted larger screens, not smaller ones, but still, having a cell phone, having Chromebooks are very handy. And if you can get over the limitations in screen size and no keyboard perhaps, or being able to print, then you could use that. They might be difficult to use for some kinds of things. Maybe you don't want to edit resumes on your phone or do spreadsheets on a tablet or something like that. Doing taxes or doing video editing on small mobile devices might be a problem. How about a Chromebook? Now, I have a Chromebook, and I really love it. It's mainly an online device, but it's very small, light, low cost most of the time. They're now making larger, more powerful and expensive models, which I'm not quite sure why, because to me, the big advantage is how small and mobile it is, yet much bigger than a tablet and with a keyboard. It's more like a real PC to me, but it's used really only or predominantly for online. You can use Google Docs and Microsoft Office Online to do office tasks. You're using it in the cloud, so you have to be online. You can do some limited offline things with editing docx or text files, which I do when I take notes at meetings and things like that. I'll use my Chromebook because it's a lot easier, but you can't do everything offline. You also have problems with some video file types, and I think even some picture file types that you can't see them. Chromebook is not capable of viewing the HD file format that my digital video camera produces, for example. Printing documents is not as straightforward, although it can be done. But still, I wouldn't give up my Chromebook. I look at it more as an accessory to computing rather than my only computing choice. So what do we do as a Windows 7 user? It's up to each of the users to figure this out. It's going to depend on what you do with your computer, how much you need very intensive computing alternatives, or has it evolved that you're just mostly surfing the web on your Windows 7 computer and could go to something that's less capable. But there's cost, compatibility, capability, and longevity issues to consider. Ease of use, whether you want to change to a new operating system, what your user needs are really going to be the most critical issue. And you might consider a multi-pronged approach where maybe you have multiple Windows 7 computers and you maybe buy a Windows 10 computer or two. Maybe you consider converting some of your other machines to Linux or Chrome OS to try that out. Keep in mind that Black Friday 2019 sales are just months away, and there'll probably be some good deals on computers then if you can wait that long. And maybe you shouldn't, because you have to figure out when you're going to make this switch. Windows 7 users need to consider taking action pretty soon, or at least come up with a plan as the sun is setting on Windows 7. And that concludes my presentation, and want to thank you all for listening, and may the 4th be with you. Are there any questions? I'll turn it back to David.
Thank you, Greg. I got to get the right microphone. Okay. We don't really have any questions, but there were some people who made some comments that Windows 7 support for Pro and Enterprise may be offered for a price.
That's probably true, but I don't know what that price is.
Yeah, I think that's more for the businesses, but
yes, certainly businesses can negotiate that. If you've got a large company with a lot of computers, I'm sure they can support that.
Oh, okay. Okay, now people, okay, they said that sometimes the video formats can be addressed with Linux containers or using Android VLC on most Chromebooks.
There are ways to get around it. There are some websites that you can put your video file up and convert it to another format that's more compatible with Chromebook.
Yeah.
But
another one said, if you had experience with loading Chrome OS on an XP netbook.
No, I have not. I'm probably, I think in my future, after updating this presentation for the VTC and finding this link about putting Chrome on PCs, I'm going to try to put the Chrome OS on a number of these, because I can run it off of a flash drive initially and see how that works. I've got some older. I've got some XP machines that I could do this with too, but I might even consider doing it with these Windows 7 machines I've got. Yeah.
Okay. Another guy asked how much risk if he keeps Windows 7. He says he has G data security.
Well,
I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not sure what that is either. I don't know. That's, we all don't really know how good, security is. We keep hearing about breaches to companies, and most every, manufacturer of, be it routers or software or operating systems, wind up with some problems. I guess, the question is, how much more do you want to risk? As, Dirty Harry said in the movies, do you feel lucky? And, it just depends. If you think you've got good aftermarket software that can protect you, then I guess, but I don't feel that confident in anything, and want to make sure that I'm protecting my most personal security and personal financial information the best way I can. Yeah,
because someone said that hackers usually go where the volume is.
That's true, but they'll also be looking at, I'm sure they're going to be looking hard at people who are dragging their feet on Windows 7 right away when something comes out, and trying to hit it hard, because there's a fair number of who are they going to target? The 3% of people who remain, although it'll probably be less, or the 1% or 1.5% on Linux machines. They're going to go for numbers in that respect for sure.
Another guy says, which software do you recommend to transfer Windows 7 to Windows 10 between computers? I'm not really sure what he wants to transfer.
Yeah, obviously there is information on that Windows link, the Microsoft link, talking about how to transfer your data information, photos, documents, and things like that from your old Windows 7 PC to a new one. There are some products PC Mover. I know I've never tried any of those, but there are things that can supposedly claim to move programs over. But once again, you've got to worry about compatibility. So that's where I'd look in those types of things.
Yeah. Well, as some guy suggested, use a thumb drive with a little bit at a time. Also, as I said, there are programs like Acronis and some other things that, have, different styles. You could back it up in Windows 7 and then download it to the other computer on Windows 10.
Yeah,
which should be able to do.
Yeah, that I don't know how well that's going to work. I use Acronis for my backups and do image backups. You're not going to be able to put the image of that onto Windows 10. You'll wipe out what Windows 10 you've got. You could back up as data only and then restore it into a partition on your Windows 10 machine. But at that point, why not just copy it, as the one person said, onto a thumb drive or other USB drive and transfer it?
Because you're not going to be able to transfer system files or settings or anything like that.
Right.
Unless you got a cloud connect, and there's a lot of programs, Google and stuff, that have, you're synchronized to the cloud. So once you open up the program in another system, then everything transfers. So.
Right.
And he's talking about cloud backup too. Same
That's
thing.
Another way, yes.
Yeah, DAO, that type of stuff will do.
Sure.
Okay. So, and someone else was saying that, with the smartphones, that people can use them with, keyboards and stuff.
That is true. You can do a Bluetooth keyboard.
That, can make things a little bit easier. Well, at least like you do at work, as I said, you can get cheap alternatives to make do, and so you don't have to replace everything.
Right.
You can get some other notebooks or laptops or Chromebooks or something that will work in a pinch, and then you can transfer the information via cloud to someplace else.